we follow our main character, oh no, Jude. Why did I forget her name? It's been a while. Hello everybody, my name is Kelsey and we're about to get very, very nerdy with some fantasy romance favorites / recommendations that aren't ACOTAR. So if you've been following along here with my reading journey in the last few months, you know that I have taken on fantasy romance as like it is my personality. And so while we are, if you've been watching my vlogs recently, you notice that we're kind of nearing the end of that obsession with fantasy romance, let's say. I still really love it. I still have a fantasy romance TBR that I want to get through. I'm still obsessed with fantasy romance, just maybe not to the extent that I was before. And because of that obsession, I've read some really, really good books. So I thought that I would recommend 10 books / series that I've read that I would categorize as fantasy romance that are not ACOTAR, because I know ACOTAR is like it's the thing everybody recommends. If you are somewhat interested in fantasy romance, someone's going to ask you if you've read a Sarah J. Maas book, specifically ACOTAR, but just Sarah J. Maas in general. Well, I love ACOTAR. You guys know I love Sarah J. Maas. It's not everyone's thing, and it's sometimes overhyped, and that's totally fine. So here are some books that I've personally read in the past few months to a year that I absolutely loved and would consider fantasy romance. So let's dive in. The first one is actually, I think most of these, now that I'm looking at them, most of these are series. So this is me telling you that this is just a bunch of series. But if you know me, I'm not a huge, like, multiple book series. I like trilogies. So a lot of these are shorter series. Not all of them. Definitely there are some that have, like, 6+ books. But there are some that are on the shorter side. With that being said, the first one I feel like is the one that I think of most when I think of fantasy romance, and that is the Kingdom of the Wicked series, which is Kingdom of the Wicked, Kingdom of the Cursed, and the third book is Kingdom of the Feared, which I don't have yet, but I will when it comes out in paperback. So this is the definition of like morally gray main character. The guy will tear down the world for his person kind of vibe. Like when you fall for the villain. That is the vibe of this story. This book, the first one, follows our main character, Victoria, who has a twin sister, and they are witches. And they live in this like Italian-inspired village. And so the book starts with Victoria's twin getting brutally murdered in a way that is very reminiscent to a few other witches who have been murdered previously, and so Victoria thinks that there is a connection between them. And so because of that, she goes down a rabbit hole and ends up teaming up with this guy called Wrath, who is one of the 7 princes of hell. And there's a lot more to it than that, but he has reasons for why he's trying to figure out what happened to Victoria's sister, and so they end up teaming up. And then, of course, the second book kind of like takes on a totally different world, and the third one even more, because we learn a lot more. There's lots of secrets that come out, but I flew through this. I was expecting, honestly, not a lot from the first book. I don't know why I wasn't expecting so much, but the first book just didn't, plot-wise, I was like, this could be okay. This could be, you know, fine. And then I think because I went in with such low expectations, it blew me out of the water. I fell in love with it. This is probably one of my favorite series I've read this year. It's definitely in my favorite series of all time. Like, it's up there. I binged this entire trilogy within about a month, which doesn't sound like a lot of time, but if you know me, you know that I'm really bad at like actually continuing with series. So the fact that I read these 2 back to back and the third one the month after is like unheard of. So I love this. This definitely starts out as YA and goes very quickly into new adult / adult in the second 2 books. So just be wary of that if you're expecting this to be more of a YA story, because it's not. It definitely takes on a different turn, but I adored this. I cannot stop raving about it. And if you like I said, that morally gray enemies to lovers vibe with a little bit of a mystery, this is your book. The next series is one that is Not finished. There are 4 out right now, but there's going to be 6 total. The 5th one comes out a little bit later this fall. But that is, and I can't even hold this up, that is the Fortuna Sworn series. So I have read the first 2 in the series, which is Fortuna Sworn, and then the second one is Restless Slumber. These are by KJ Sutton. This is a enemies to lovers fae romance, and I love fae. So if you are a fan of all things fae, this is definitely your vibe. If you like the plot of the first ACOTAR book, as far as the ending of that goes, this is your book. We follow our main character, Fortuna, who is a nightmare. And basically what that means is she has the power to know a person's biggest fear by touch. And if she touches you, then she, like I said, knows your biggest fear and can use it against you. She can kind of create visions in your mind, which can paralyze you because of fear. And so she, at the beginning of this book, her brother has been missing for 2 years. Everyone is convinced that he has died, but she is not convinced. She knows that like there's something else going on, and she gets approached by this fae at the very beginning, or near the beginning of the first book, and he basically says, I know what happened to your brother. I can help you figure some stuff out, but you have to marry me. And she's first not a fan, but then agrees to do so. And then of course it continues from there. So we've got the first 2, like I mentioned, and then I also have the 3rd one, which is Deadly Dreams, and the 4th one, which is Beautiful Nightmares. They do get bigger and bigger, so if you're not the biggest fan of huge fantasy books, maybe find the audiobooks, because the audiobooks are really good. But the first one's a good one to dive into because it has an end where you can be satisfied with it, even if it doesn't wrap everything up. So, and it's not too long to see if you actually like this world. It is more new adult / adult. Check trigger warnings, because KJ Sutton's really good about writing the entirety of her trigger warnings at the beginning of her books, and there's definitely some stuff. A lot of it is themes rather than actual on-page stuff, but just be wary of that. But I fell head over heels in love with this story. I didn't know what I was expecting. I've never read anything by KJ Sutton before, but she just has this very immersive writing style where you can really visualize the world. It does help that this takes place partially in like our world and then partially in a fantasy world, but there's just something about it that's very immersive, and you can really visualize kind of what's going on. And I just love the character Fortuna because she's very like tortured in a way. Like there's a lot going on with her. So if you like ACOTAR specifically, but if you like that enemies to lovers, mysterious main guy character vibes, this is definitely a series for you. The next series is one that I don't actually own physically. I would love to own physically one day, but we just don't own it yet, which is fine. And that is the Bridge Kingdom series by Danielle L. Jensen. We have 3 books out right now. The 4th one, I actually have all 4 on Audible. So the 4th one doesn't come out in paperback until September, I want to say, but there's going to be 6 books in the series, and the way the series works is they are 2 book arcs. So the first 2 books follow one set of characters, the second 2 another set, third 2 third set, and it all takes place in this world where there is a kingdom on a bridge, and they control a lot of the trade. So our first book starts with our main female lead, who has been trained basically as an assassin. Her father has trained them, and his staff have trained them all to be like assassin spies, and so her job is to basically infiltrate the Bridge Kingdom. She gets proposed to / marries the king of the Bridge Kingdom and is kind of forced into their world. And her job is to find out kind of a way to get in so that her dad can conquer that land because it's the most lucrative in the world. And of course, things do not go as planned. There is a romance of sorts between her and the king. The second book follows, I believe, or the second arc follows, I believe, her brother, I want to say. He is the prince of a different land, so I really want to say it's her brother, and then I believe a princess of another land. There's like a bunch of lands going on here. So it's a wartime kind of story, but it's set in the sea because Bridge Kingdom, it's literally a kingdom on a bridge on the water. So there's a lot of sea and ship and things like that. So if you like sea vibes, piratey kind of vibes, you probably will like this. If you like the enemies to lovers vibe, if you like the whole like she's been sent to assassinate him and it doesn't work out, because that's very popular, that's also for you. If you like a cinnamon roll main character, because like he's got a lot of hardness to him because he has to be king, but also he's a sweetheart and would do anything. So like, if those are your vibes, then this is definitely for you. I would recommend having the second book on tap if you're reading the first one, because I had only planned to read the first one. I think I read it for a vlog series I was doing. It was BookTube Baby when I did it for Becca. So I read that one and then immediately picked up the second one because I needed answers. And that's why I've put off reading the third one, which I'm hoping to get to this month, because I want to read those two back to back. Because if they're like the first two, you're going to want them in sets of 2. So I love this. It's definitely, I feel like, a book that I've only heard a very select few of people talk about. So if they like it, I've heard that if you like it, you love it. And it's got that very addictive writing style, and the plot itself is really good. And the fact that these are relatively short books, and I can also really visualize the world and the world building in this is incredible, because like, it's a romance, but the fact that there's such good plot to it as well, I just really enjoyed it, and it was very, very good. So the next one is a duology, and this is for my fans of Not Long series. This one only has 1 out right now, but the second one does come out later this year. I just recently read it, and that is Divine Rivals, and this is by Rebecca Ross. This is for fans of historical fiction that are trying out maybe fantasy for the first time. This is a perfect book to do that with, but the romance elements in this is very like swoony. It is enemies to lovers in a way. It is like rivals, clearly, but it does take place during war, and it is very, like, swoony is the best way I can describe it. Like, I fell head over heels in love with this couple, and the fact that like it's been a hot second and I'm still thinking about it bodes well. So this book follows our two main characters. We have Iris and Roman, and they are both reporters, and it takes place in this world that is very reminiscent of like World War II time period, but the war is fought by the gods. So you do have that like fantasy element. It's very low fantasy. I think the second book's gonna have way more. And then there's also some fantastical items in this book. Like, there are some typewriters who do some fantastical things. So you do have a lot of like the history is fantastical, but this feels very, very historical fiction. So this follows our main two characters, Iris and Roman, who are both reporters, and they work at the same newspaper magazine place, and they're both vying for the same position. And due to events, they basically end up being reporters on the sideline of the war. And so it's way more than that, but they take their typewriters with them, and they kind of search through to find stories of like what's actually happening on the front line. So I loved them. I loved it. It started off okay, and it just spiraled from there, and it got so much better. So I highly, highly recommend. But again, this is for like people who want that very light fantasy vibe, but the romance is just like, they're so perfect, you know? The next one is one that I'm sure many of you have read. It's been out for a very long time, and it's not a new book, but it's one that I'm reminded how much I love. And that one is the Cruel Prince Trilogy by Holly Black, which is The Cruel Prince, The Wicked King, and The Queen of Nothing. So these are my special editions that I got so long ago. But I loved this series. It is fae romance, fairy, that kind of thing. So if you like that vibe, this is definitely for you. So this series follows our main character, Jude, who is human. And she and her twin sister, who is part human, part fairy, I can't remember exactly how it is, but basically they are raised by a guy who killed their mother. And so they're raised in fairy, and they are not thought highly of by the fairies. And so she basically, there's a guy named Carden who's the prince, and he's the cruel prince, and they do not get along. And it's their story. It's her trying to make her mark on the world because she's human. She can do things like lie, like fairies can't do. And she really wants to be important. Her dad, or the guy who, I don't even know how to explain this. The guy who is her father figure, if you will, is her mother's ex-husband, who is a fairy, and he killed her mother and her father, who were both human. So it's a lot, but like she considers him her dad in a way, surrogate father, if you will. And so he is really high up in the military and she wants to be useful. And so it's very politically driven. It goes way more politically driven when you get into the later books, but it is the grand sweeping story of Jude and Cardan. And I love them. It's been a while since I read these books. Like, I'm pretty sure The Cruel Prince I read when I first started my booktube channel 5 years ago. Oh my gosh, is that right? It's been a while. So I'm definitely due for a reread of these, but I remember loving them, and they definitely have that fantasy romance with political twist vibes to it. So if you like fae and enemies to lovers, this is definitely a series for you. All right, the next one is one that I'm sure you are not surprised is on there, and that is the From a Blood and Ash series by Jennifer L. Armentrout. I have the first 4. I believe the 5th one is out now, if I am correct. And then there is at least 2 more planned. The 6th one, I think, comes out sometime next year. So we have From Blood and Ash, which is the first one, A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire. I just recently finished The Crown of Gilded Bones. And then the last one is A War of Two Queens. So it's going to be a long series, and it is not a short series by any stretch of the imagination. This is definitely one of the longer ones that's on this list. But I read From Blood and Ash a couple of years ago, I want to say, and it kind of took over my life. I didn't really know what to expect going into it. I'd heard really good things. There are some people out there that I trust their romance recommendations and their fantasy romance recommendations, and they swore by this series. And there's also a lot of mystery that surrounds the fantastical elements in this series. So we follow our main character, Poppy, who in this world is considered the maiden. And basically what that means is that she is going to be given to the gods. And because of that, she has to basically be this very pure, perfect person. She thinks of her life as kind of like in a prison because she's supposed to wear white the entire time. She's supposed to cover her face when she's around people. She cannot experience pleasure and fun and all of a bunch of different emotions, and like she shouldn't be able to know how to fight even though she does. And the story really kicks off when she gets a new bodyguard named Hawk. And so it is your typical fantasy romance, semi-dystopian, like breaking down the empire kind of vibes, but the romantic elements are just chef's kiss perfect. So if you like banter and you like the romantic elements are like they flirt through fighting, basically. It's definitely a bigger series, but if you want a series that is going to consume you heart and soul, that you are going to seriously be obsessed with the writing and the world, and it's a very expansive world. So if you are okay with those higher fantasy, very expansive worlds, this is definitely for you. I'm generally not someone like that, but I'm enjoying my time reading this, and I love our romance here, and I love how we learn even more and more about this world and the story as we continue along. And I am just so obsessed with these characters. And if you like cliffhangers, this is a series for you because she really likes to do that. She likes to take the last like 50 pages and give you about like 3 or 4 different plot twists and then a cliffhanger. And I eat that up. I eat it up. So yes, I love this series. I talk about it a lot, but I am on the bandwagon for this one. So if you want a pretty expansive, higher fantasy world that has lots of different like fantastical creatures, and there's a lot to the world building elements of it, this is definitely the series for you. The next one is for another kind of one for my historical fiction lovers. It's a duology and they're both out, and it has more fantastical elements than like Divine Rivals does, but it is it's more YA, I guess, YA new adult, but that is These Violent Delights / Our Violent Ends by Chloe Gong. This is a Romeo and Juliet retelling set in 20s Shanghai. It follows 2 rival gangs who their the kids of the leaders of these gangs are Juliet and Roma, which is our Romeo and Juliet characters. The story starts with a bunch of gang members from both their gangs dying in very specific ways, and so of course at first they think it's the other gang, and then they find out that it's happening to both of them. So Roma, Juliet, and all of their super close friends team up to kind of figure out what happens. I felt like the first book I gave 3 stars. It was just okay. I think now if I went back into it, I could pick up a lot more than I did the first time. But the second book, Our Violent Ends, I was almost not going to read, and it blew me away. I fell head over heels in love with our characters all over again. So this is just a duology, but if you like the world, this author has other books. There's another duology out that follows a character from the series, I think 5 or 10 years in the future. And then there's also a set of novellas that follow some characters from this series. So there's more things beyond these 2 if you really enjoy it. But if you just want the vibes of these 2, it's definitely giving like mafia vibes and, you know, enemies to lovers, the whole Romeo and Juliet kind of star-crossed lovers things. And I just love them. I just genuinely love them. And I didn't at first. And then the second book made me fall for them all over again. I will say, just as a heads up, the second book not so much, the first book for sure. If you have a thing with insects that's not your thing, that's a huge part of the plot, so just kind of be aware of that. But these are definitely gruesome stories, but I love them. I love the characters. They're so well-rounded, and I can't get enough of them. The next one is also a trilogy. The third one is coming out this, I want to say it's in September, if I am correct. But the first 2 are out, and that is Once Upon a Broken Heart, the second one being The Ballad of Never After. And these are both by Stephanie Garber. I have never read anything by Stephanie Garber, and I know that these are kind of connected to the Caraval series. I don't know how, because I didn't read that trilogy, but this is fun, lovely. I love it. It has like that fairy tale vibe to it, so if you like that kind of thing, this is definitely a series for you. We follow our main character, Evangeline, who at the beginning of this book, the person that she's fallen in love with is marrying somebody else, and she is convinced that there's something else going on, and so she comes to one of the fates. This guy is Jax. He is the fate of broken hearts, and she basically asks him to stop the wedding at all costs, and he's like, all right, fine, I'll do that, but that means that you now owe me 3 kisses. And he's got a whole story behind him where if he kisses somebody, they die unless it's his true love, so he can't kiss anybody, but he's using her to do some of his biddings, so she has to kiss 3 people. She's got like 3 hearts on her wrist, and so each time she does something for him, one of the hearts goes away, and that's like the payment for stopping this wedding. There's way more to it. It continues much more into the next one. There's prophecy and mythology of this world, and there's, you know, a rebellion of sorts, and lots of things going on in this series. But I didn't expect a whole lot going into this one. I didn't really know what to expect going into this one. It's giving me like, I don't know why, but it's giving me like Far, Far Away from Shrek vibes. Make it make sense, but that's like that fairy tale-ness that I'm thinking of, and I loved it. So if you want a more YA leaning story, this is definitely for you. It has a huge slow burn. It also just has a main character who is genuinely so much fun to read about, and there's a lot more to it than that, but I love it. These are my special Fairy Loot editions that I've fallen for, so I can't wait for the third one to come out and finish up this series, because I have questions and I need answers. But yeah, these took over my life for a while, and I wasn't expecting them to, and they're so good. The next one is a companion series, so you can pick and choose which ones you want to read. They all take place in the same world, but they follow different mythology creatures, if you will. There is a 4th one coming out this year, and that is the Married to Magic series by Elise Kova. The first one is A Deal with the Elf King, the second one is A Dance with the Fey Prince, and the third one is A Duel with the Vampire Lord. I can't remember what the 4th one's called, but it's something about a siren. So, like I said, they all take place in the same world, but they're all standalone happily ever after stories. Again, clearly with different people. We have elf, fae, and vampire. So if some things are your favorite. Like, I'm a huge fan of fae and elf stories. Those are the ones that interested me the most. These are slightly influenced, I want to say, by fairy tales. Deal with the Elf King is Persephone and Hades / Beauty and the Beast. The Fae Prince one is Cinderella / Eros and Psyche, and then we have a Duel with the Vampire Lord, which it says here is like Beauty and the Beast / Snow White. So, and I'm assuming that the Siren one is going to be slightly influenced by Little Mermaid. So if you like those vibes, they do have like the fairy tale vibes to it, but all of them are different stories, so you can pick and choose. But I love Elise Kova's writing. She does a beautiful way of writing these stories that are not super long, but have enough plot to them that you feel like the romantic elements of them are not forced in any way. They feel very realistic, and you also fall for these characters. These are new adult stories, just so you're aware. So they have like that very in between, like more than YA, not quite fully smutty when it comes to adult, but also like more different themes as well within the story. I have not read Deal with a Vampire Lord yet, but I'm hoping to get to that one this year. But I've read both of these physically because they do have audiobooks, I want to say, on Audible, but I didn't get around to doing them audibly. And I flew through these. And if you guys know anything about me, you know that I do not read fast. I read very slowly. Like, it's very easy to take an entire month to read one of these books. And I think I took this one specifically on vacation to the beach, and I finished it in like 4 days. I was obsessed. I could not put the stories down. So I wanted to recommend this series because I love Elise Kova's writing style. She does a lot of enemies to lovers stuff, but this series specifically is good so that you can pick and choose. If you're like me and you just love them all, then that's great. But if you aren't feeling the vampires, or you're not feeling a fae, or whatever it is, there are options for you, and you don't have to read them in any specific order. So I love them. And then the very last book is the first, and I don't even know how long of a series. I've heard anything from 2 to 5 books, so take that with a grain of salt. Is my new obsession, or one of my new obsessions, and I feel like this list wasn't complete unless I did the super hyped book that everyone's talking about, which is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. I read this in June. I got the ebook because my best friend Lauren told me that I should read it, and I trust her opinion, and I did, and it took over my soul. Like, honestly, this book and ACOTAR, when I was rereading it this summer, was part of the reason for my fantasy romance kick that took full force this summer. I love this story. I know it's so overhyped, and I know a lot of people do not want to jump on the hype train, but if you are a fantasy romance fan who enjoys dragons, let me stop. This is how it was phrased to me. If you like How to Train Your Dragon and the writing of like ACOTAR and Sarah J. Maas and that kind of stuff, then this is your book, because it has that addictive writing style. It has that addictive romance. It has that enemies to lovers romance, but it has the dragon element that I love. Like, How to Train Your Dragon is one of my favorite movies. I love Toothless as a character, and there's a dragon in here called Tarn who reminds me of, like, if Toothless was an old grumpy man. Like, that's the vibe. He's got the sass of Toothless, and I just think it's so funny and genuinely fun to read about. So if you don't know anything, let me enlighten you a little bit about this story. We follow our main character, Violet, who is the youngest child of one of the generals at this war college. And this war college has different paths that you can go down, and she has always been kind of trained as a scribe, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's like she's going to spend her time in the library, archivist, librarian, anything like that, kind of wrapped up into one thing. Her brother and sister were both writers, which is the kind of soldier sect of this college where they bond with the dragon, and so therefore you will fight on the dragon, like on the back of the dragon, and the dragon, depending on who you get, will give you a specific ability. So she's always been thought that she's going to be a scribe. Her mother has different ideas for her and tells her that she has to be a writer, and so she also suffers from, I believe it's like chronic fatigue syndrome, maybe, but it's definitely, she suffers from a chronic illness that just makes her genuinely drained and tired. And so because of that, she's really worried, but she ends up going into this war college and running into a childhood best friend. But then we also have this guy named Xaden, and Xaden is the son of the leader of the rebels, because there was a rebel force that took over a few years ago. And so because of her, who her mother is and of who his father is, they do not get along. And it stems from that, and it's her learning to fight on a dragon, honestly. And I live for them. I live for the characters in here. The way that I reacted to this book is very similar to how I reacted to House of Earth and Blood, the first in the Crescent City series, when I read that one. That one, I had every single emotion under the rainbow. I laughed, I cried, I threw my book, I picked it up, I swooned, like everything you could think of, that happened in this book too. So like my emotions were all over the place, and I love it. So I was afraid to get on the hype train for this because it's literally everywhere. It's been sold out. I randomly found this in a small independent bookstore in New York City. That's the only reason I was able to find it. I get it. I get the hype, and I think the hype is worth it if you are a fantasy romance fan who likes dragons. And I usually steer clear of dragon books, not on purpose. I don't like go, oh, that has dragons in it, I'm not going to read it. But like, you know, Game of Thrones does not interest me, and that's probably, I think, one of the most popular fantasy romance books, or not fantasy romance, fantasy books that has dragons in it. And I just steer clear without meaning to steer clear, and this was so good. So if I haven't hyped it enough, here's your final warning that I love it, and you should read it if you haven't already. And that's it. That is a look at 10 series, I think they're all series, that I just fell head over heels with at least part of the story. The part that's out usually is what I've fallen in love with, but I hope that you guys enjoyed. I try to give you somewhat of a variety of different lengths in series, different types of stories, whether they are like fae stories or, you know, dragons, you know, whatever it is. I hope you guys enjoyed. And if you are a fantasy romance reader yourself, as always, I would love to know some of your favorite books, if you agree with the books that I put on this list, or what you would add from your own personal reading journey when it comes to fantasy romance. Because I have a fantasy romance TBR, but you guys know I'm always happy to add to it. But if you like this video, and I very much hope that you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you'd like to be part of this awesome growing family. I've also got all my social media down there, as well as other fun bookish links, so check all that out. And I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!